We want to thank you all for joining us and thank our presenters for putting this on. This is part of our focus area networks within ALE. And these two different groups actually came together to offer this for you, but I'm going to let them take it away because they are the stars of the show and going to be able to tell us all about what they're going to be doing. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hannah Sunderman now. So thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. John, thank you for all your work putting the registration together and getting us all here. Zoom can be complicated, but we are delighted that you all registered and found this topic to be interesting. I, along with Dami, are the new co-leaders of the research fan through ALE. And then we also have on us the two co-leaders of the student fan at ALE. So Matt Gold and Kira, and they'll introduce themselves in a second. We first came up with this idea when we were at ALE this summer in Nashville, and people were throwing out what they'd like to see the fans do. This was a topic that emerged from graduate students at the research fan at ALE. Really this idea of how do we take what we're doing in class and make it something that's meaningful on our CV. So a variety of scholarly outputs. So then we partnered with the student fan who said, this sounds great. We'd love to engage to bring the panel here today. So we'll start with just doing some quick introductions, and then we have some questions that we outlined based on the discussions that we've had, as well as discussions with the fan that we'll talk through at the beginning, and then open it up to the group to ask additional questions, as well as to share additional insights. We certainly don't know everything about this topic, so we would love to hear from you all and learn from you about what's been working for you at your institution and in your context. So I can start by introducing myself. My name is, as John said, Hannah Sunderman, and I'm an assistant professor at Virginia Tech. My areas of specialization are in leadership education and development, and some of my recent work has really focused on leader identity and meaning making. And then I also have a background in studying mentoring and leadership development interventions. My real interest in this topic is from my graduate school experience. So as I was getting into my later years in my graduate program, this was something I was really trying to focus on, was how do I turn my class assignments, instead of just writing a paper for a class topic and that being the end of it, really translating that into something that's going to help me in academia and on the job market. And so that's when I first started thinking about this, and have been talking with other graduate students about it since. And I think it has a real value add for our field, for ALE, the more that we're encouraging students to utilize their assignments as catalysts for scholarly work as well. So that's me. Next, we're going to pass it off in order of the beautiful graphic that John created to the first Matt Sauchek, and so he can introduce himself.
I really appreciate that. As Zoom happens, they're gardening outside, so if you hear anything, I certainly apologize. Associate Professor Matt Sauchek. I'm at the University of Florida. I've been there for about 8 years now. My research interests are in organizational leadership. I do a lot of work in humility and how humility impacts leadership development. And then I've done a lot of work with leadership education. So really happy to be here.
Thank you, Matt. Next, we have Lori.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lori Niffin. I'm an assistant professor at Fort Hays State University. And I focus more on like community-based and collective forms of leadership. And I also do a lot of qualitative studies and specialize more in qualitative studies, and teach a course to my master's students on that. So I'm really excited for this webinar because of that reason.
Thanks, Lori. Next, we have Dami.
My name is Dami Alagbalayi. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Leadership and Organizational Studies at the University of Southern Maine. My research interests are in the areas of collaborative leadership, teamwork, and followership. I'm interested in this topic because, as Hannah mentioned, I co-lead the research studies fan with Hannah, and during the last ALA conference, some of our student members signified interest in this type of webinar. I'm also interested in this topic because I was once a graduate student. And during that time, I was fortunate to convert my assignments to conference papers and journal articles. And I'm happy to share what I know. And like Hannah said, we don't know everything, so we are hoping to learn from you guys as well.
Thanks, Dami. Next, we have Kira.
My name is Kira J. Toft. I currently serve as the Assistant Director of Sustainability and Leadership at Georgia Southern University, but I'm also a doctoral candidate at the University of North Georgia, which is why I'm stoked about this meeting and just having conversations on how to take your academic assignments and transition them into conference proposals and journals, because that is currently what we're talking about in my cohort classes and trying to support one another. So I'm just jazzed to be here. Matthew's my excellent co-lead who does pretty much everything, so I'm really just going to hand him the reins.
I can hop in next. So my name is Matthew Gold. I'm a master's student at the University of Florida. My research interest really falls along the lines of using film or visual media to enhance student learning and try to get the best outcomes out of whatever students are doing in the class.
Thanks, Matt. So we'll dive in with our first question. And the first thing we were interested in talking about is just to brainstorm the various outputs from class assignments. So where are the options of where you could take class assignments? So I'll turn it over to the panelists for ideas.
Well, I think I can start us off. I think there are multiple options. And of course, the common ones are the conference presentations, poster, journal articles, and of course, for land-grant universities, you sometimes have extension, publication, and book chapters is also another outlet for your assignments.
Yeah, I'll add in there that I think obviously conferences are a great place to take your work, because not only are you going to be able to share, but you're going to be able to learn as part of that process too. Also, not all formats of conference sessions are created equally. So you might want to think about what do you want that conference session to do for your work? So a lot of times if I have a really interesting idea, but I need to like incubate that with people, I take it to a round table. If I want to network around that issue, I take it to a poster presentation. If I have a paper and I want some feedback before I submit that to a journal, I take it as a paper presentation. Workshops, if you have come upon something really interesting and you want to help teach others about that. And then also if you have a really solid study and you're like ready to hang it on the fridge, like bring it as a research presentation and share that out in that shorter format there. But being really intentional, I remember as a grad student just wanting to get accepted somewhere just because I wanted to be able to go to the conference and get funding for the conference and be there, but not as intentional about how do I want to use this conference session to advance the work in various stages of different projects.
Mm-hmm. That's great feedback. One thought too that I had as we were brainstorming these questions is thinking about outputs too that are for still beneficial in a scholarly way. It can be lines in the CV, but are more community trainings or a workshop, which also couples well with what you were saying, Lori, is that if you can take a class project, perhaps if you've built something that's for leadership development or for an organization and implement it, and even just collect survey data and evaluation survey, did the participants feel that it met your learning objectives? That really can be translated into either for ALE, an innovative practice paper, or even a research paper. So that takes a little bit beyond just the classroom presentation, but if you're able to implement the training and just do a survey at the end with participants, it sets you up to have an effective conference presentation.
I also think things like blogs and podcasts have become really interesting or like kind of blown up lately. So I even did this with my own study recently, where the study was kind of interesting, but probably not relevant enough to go on to full publication. So we put it out as a blog. So like the small takeaways could still be out in the world, but we didn't take months and months to write up a manuscript that probably wasn't going to make it till the end.
Yeah, and to kind of follow up on what Laurie just said, I think it's also important to realize that some of your assignments will not be suitable for journals. I'm sorry to break that to you, but if I'm being honest, we know that many assignments don't require the rigor that is required by most of these publishing outlets. And so I think there's utility in knowing the type of assignments that would work. And I would say, usually that includes things like term papers. Those are usually more extensive. Preliminary exams are also very extensive. As a matter of fact, I published conference papers for my preliminary exams. Comprehensive exams is also another one. And of course, you have the literature review section of your thesis and dissertation, and the thesis and dissertation itself. Usually you can publish multiple articles from your thesis and dissertation. And the other stuff that are not as, bigger, or that are not suitable for this type of outlets, you can publish it in, blogs and whatnot, like Laurie said.
I've seen too, for assignments that I've seen students do this past year, assignments that aren't going to translate into, a journal article, but perhaps were collaborative in a graduate course that they've submitted as a roundtable to Lori, your point, to get further ideas. How do we see these theories connecting, or even as a poster? But then the goal is, even if you're not going to publish that thing, or maybe even an extension publication, that you're able to start, it building towards future work as well. Matt, any additional thoughts or ideas on outlets for graduate school work?
Yeah, so I can add on to something that I recently did. So from some of my leadership classes that I've taken, I went to a local high school with one of my other classmates, and we put on a small workshop for a high school agricultural class that really needed leadership. Our friend was the teacher there, so we were able to reach out to her, and she really needed someone to come talk about strengths and teams for her leadership section of the course. And we were just able to take that learning and any assignments that we had used in the past for our leadership theory courses or anything else related, and kind of created a workshop for other audiences that we typically don't get to work with.
Mm-hmm. Great thought, Matt.
Yeah, I think everybody really covered a lot of them. I think, Hannah, what you said, I think is really of value, is that every time you're thinking about an assignment, whether it can go out into a journal or be a blog or go for a roundtable, all those are wonderful, wonderful examples. But sometimes the assignment is just a piece of one of those. And then how do you think through, can this just be the introduction to a journal article? Or is this going to be one theoretical underpinning for something I'm writing on a paper or a poster? And how do I do that to the best of my ability so that I can use that afterwards? I think a lot of this is just figuring out, how do you use the time you're putting into these things effectively, because time is really important. So how do you think through that next step? And sometimes it's just a smaller piece of a paper or a presentation or a poster.
Excellent. Okay, we can shift back to this topic too, but I want to shift to our next question. We talked about what are outputs. Now we're thinking about how we go about transitioning assignments, theses, dissertations into journal articles or conference submissions, blogs, extension publication. What does that how process look like?
Can I also start us off?
Yes, thanks, Tommy.
Yeah, my approach is that, people typically say you have the assignment, then you convert it, you transform the assignment. My approach is sort of backwards, right? And I say, be proactive, okay? One of my tips is you need a plan beforehand that you're going to use this assignment as a publication. If you have the mindset, then it'll save you a lot of time in terms of trying to convert it, because it's already, halfway there. It's not all the way there, but it's halfway there. And so assuming you already have this type of mindset where you're proactive, and the next task would be that you need to design a topic or research questions that aligns with both the class assignment as well as the journal article. Okay. And to do this, I would say you need to find the gap in the literature in your topic area. Mm-hmm. And the topic area in this case would be the topic of the assignment, because of course you don't want to, if it doesn't align with the assignment, then it's pointless, right? So the topic would be determined by the assignment, and your job is to find the gap in the literature so it'll be useful for the journal or the conference, okay? And one of the ways, so I think it might be helpful to share the ways I go about finding gaps, which is not, I don't think it's peculiar to me. I'm sure most people do too. But one of the ways is to, of course, do an extensive review of recently published articles on that topic. Another way, which is sort of a shortcut, is to go to the recommendations for future research. You would find this at the end of most journal articles, where they recommend for future research to consider certain topics or explore certain questions. And when you go there, you would find potential research questions that would be good for your assignment and would also align with the research. But I think I'd mentioned that you also need to carry your instructor along in all of this, so as to ensure that what you're doing is fulfilling the requirements of the assignment. And I think it's okay to inform them that you're planning assignment for publication in the future. I'll stop there.
Great.
For
One
me,
thing go ahead, Matt. Sorry, go ahead. No, you take it.
Okay. So just the two things that I always kind of pay attention to and would encourage folks to think about is, one is the environments. You know, I think it's important to build an environment that's always working towards that end outcome. I loved what was said about that idea of re-engineering success. So starting with that end in mind and figuring out how you get there from day one. As teachers, I think it's really important for us as educators to realize that these are moments where we can increase the scholarly output of students who we really need to be at that level to kind of take over some of the work that we're doing, to engage with that process. So how are we creating an environment? So how does the assignment help them think through that process? And I don't think every assignment has to go to a journal. As we said, we can break those down in pieces. Extension was mentioned. Like to run a class, this organizational leadership class, and have them do what we call EDIS publications, and that's to go out to extension agents. You can get them through Google search. It's a way to put outputs out there. So it's built into the class that they do that. Not every single one will do that. They'll not all be at that level, and all of the students will need to carry on after the class to really fine tune it. We have an environment at the University of Florida where our dissertations, you can choose to do the kind of traditional dissertation, or our dissertation of you do the first 3 chapters and then you write 3 articles for chapters 4 and 5. And that takes into account some of those pieces. And those are articles that can get immediately published in that process. And those who are looking to kind of move in that direction, we've built that out for them. And then the final thing I'll say is, I think the environment's really important, but I think the individual is really important. I would encourage everybody on here, something I didn't do until much later on that I maybe regret or wish I would have done sooner, is really get to learn all of the ways outputs happen. So if it's the Journal of Leadership Studies, what are they looking for? A poster presentation at ALE, what will that look like? At ILA, doing a roundtable, what's some of the stuff they're going to ask me for, so that I can see what assignment will fit that best almost inherently as I'm starting that out. The more you get to know about the resources that are out there, the ways to put your outputs into the world, the easier it is to say, oh, this assignment matches this particular output way. And then you can put the time and energy that you would separately put into the class, and maybe putting a roundtable together to kind of come together and put out a really nice output, not only for the class, but for something you can submit later.
Absolutely. I think too, Matt, I appreciate your framing around it is also incumbent upon us as faculty to think about how we are aiding graduate students in doing this. It's not just a responsibility for graduate students. And I remember Matt Gold sharing too how you had done the extension publications as an example in your class, which helps for some of our thinking. This year, I'm co-teaching a seminar on the toxic or dark side of leadership. And it's been really interesting. That was one of the things that we brought into, how can we have a final curriculum project that has some type of meaningful output? And so with other people have done this before too, looking at doing an open access educational resource where we can take graduate students' final projects and put them into an open access document for other people in leadership education to utilize, which isn't a traditional, journal article or even a conference presentation, but is an output. It's an open educational resource that people across the world could access for tools when they're teaching on these topics.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Appreciate that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. So just to build on what you had said is that, like, in addition to, letting your faculty know or seeking that, is that if you are taking something, especially if you've already done the assignment and now you're trying to move it into an article, this happens a lot for my students in my qualitative research class, is that they've gone through this, and I think it would be similar for like a thesis or dissertation. You're very focused on getting through that project, and that is for an academic audience, right? You're doing that to be able to demonstrate through an educational process that you're proficient at this type of research. And then thinking there's a very different audience that you're wanting to talk to, maybe through just at the conference or in a journal readers or that. So we have like an academic or maybe even a community audience. So thinking about who that is, and then engaging external people like a faculty member or another peer to help you think about what from that larger project needs to be distilled down into the smaller things. I kind of feel, and maybe in my own work too, like when you're looking at something you spent so much time building, this large thing and explaining it all, it can be hard to think about what you can cut out. Because you feel close to that work and you think all of it's important. And so having an external person to come in and say like, no, here's a key piece, or out of all this literature, maybe it could be this small, to help you think about how to prioritize what the audience that you're now writing for is going to value the most.
Yeah, I'd look to add on to that too, is I think as a graduate student myself, and I see this in myself, is sometimes I go directly to trying to make it something more and not giving it time to simmer or set a little bit. And I think taking that time off, even if it's a couple weeks and then going back to it, you might be able to find those smaller pieces that you want to chop it down to.
So one of the things that we had talked about too was providing an example. So I had pulled up one as we're talking about how to do this, that I'm happy to share if y'all are good with me sharing my screen. I'll pull it up. And this was a project that I had worked on in my final year of graduate school. It was in a leadership development class that was taught by my advisor, Dr. Hastings. And so I'll share my desktop. This was the final publication, but this is how it really started out. So this is our final client report that we produced for the class. It was our final class assignment. And this was built on facilitating a needs assessment with a group of people and then planning for what your intervention would be. So you can see I have my theories I was using, the results of my assessment that I had done with the students, and then some figures I had produced, how I fed back the data to the students, and then the program outcomes, learning objectives, and then the different activities that I would use to facilitate a training and development program. But we didn't ever do the training and development program as part of the class. We had just written it up. So then the next year I did the training and development program and then wrote it up for ALE as I think it was an innovative practice paper. So you can see this is reformatted to meet the guidelines of ALE. It's got different headings. We have participant objectives, and then goes into what looks like a more traditional journal article. So the introduction, the background, leadership theory and framework. So a lot of this is pulled, but it's reformatted. And Matt, you talked about this to meet the needs of that specific outlet. So things are in black and white. And then here it was published as a journal article in Joel. So you can see it was a pretty smooth transition from the conference presentation to a journal article, but still required just some reformatting to get it ready. So that's an example of what it looked like for me to make that transition with one of my graduate school documents. And I will say too, it did take a little bit of extra work to do the implementation and then write it up, but I had so much of the work already done as a graduate student. So what other examples do you all have of things that you've seen work well to go about the process of making that scholarly transformation?
So I have an example. I don't have my screen to share, but I had a colleague in my doc program who invited me to her dissertation as a second coder. And so I got to see her whole dissertation process by coming in as part of her analysis and then getting to read her findings. And what she ended up doing, I thought was really thoughtful, was that she had a lot of findings. So being able to put her whole dissertation into one article just would have been too much, but she was able to identify kind of two major areas of the findings that also spoke to different audiences. So she ended up chunking that into two different articles. And so some of the, background and lit review is pulling upon kind of the same things. But then as getting down in the research question, it was like one question kind of guided one article and one guided the other, and the findings fit with that. And I thought that was just a really nice way to get, not just to get two articles, but because it really spoke to two different audiences. And so she was very intentional about where those went to and to be able to tell that full story around each.
I also have an example. I don't think I need to share my screen. I think Hannah's would suffice. But there was when I was a grad student, I had written a paper for my preliminary examination. And one of the things that my advisor then did was that he phrased the question as he said to write a theory manuscript for the Journal of Leadership Education.
Mm-hmm.
I think that also connects to what everyone has been saying. The instructor has a big role to play in all of this. When I wrote the theory manuscript, of course, I had to go to the Journal of Leadership Education and see what the theory manuscript looked like. And I formatted it based on that. So it was a seamless transition for me, because I literally just took what I had written and submitted to the outlet. But of course, the preliminary examination required, I think, 20 pages. So there were lots of fluff that I had to cut out when I was submitting it to the journal. And that's a typical thing you would notice. Most journals want you to be concise and just straight to the point. So you might have some of the fluff.
So a few specific questions we have on this topic is how to draft research questions / topics that align with class assignments and research outputs. And the second one is how a literature review or specific sections from a class assignment could also be used for a submission. Whoever wants to jump in.
It's an interesting balance as a faculty member, trying to understand the needs of the students and all the different interests in leadership education. One of the blessings we have at such a young field is that there's so many different ways to study it, and there's so many things that you can be engaged with. So when giving a question out there that somebody may want to write on or may want to push forward, it can become overwhelming for faculty members to have so many different topics come in and to be able to move all those topics forward and to engage with that process. But I do think it goes to the point of really picking those classes and those faculty who align with what you're thinking about doing. If it's qualitative work, really engaging in your qualitative work and finding a qualitative class that really speaks to you, because I think there's that natural connection that faculty are willing to put time in, because it's a win-win for both the student and the faculty if something goes out to publication or if there is an output that can be in that process. So if you naturally have an interest in humility or leadership development or organizational leadership, that's something I'm really interested in, and that's those kind of students I'm really interested in having take my classes and engage with that process. So finding and being really kind of purposeful and intentional about how you select the class you take, select the teacher you're taking it with, but then also think through how does what I'm interested in and what they're interested in align so that I could put together a piece for the class that does then allow for some ease of access for the faculty to give their time to move that paper forward. I have seen that be really, really beneficial.
I also think too, if you're a graduate student or you have a graduate student taking a class, if they're able to somehow fit in their thesis or dissertation work into some type of assignment just to get a head start. Obviously, we have 2, 3, maybe 4 years to finish our degree, which might not be enough time for a lot of people. If they can get started in a class for a theoretical framework, an introduction, or some other aspect of it, try to double dip as best you can, obviously without copying your own work. But it's really helpful for me to kind of use my classes as a time for writing whenever I can.
An example I was thinking about from my graduate school too, which also speaks to how to turn a literature review into something, is in our diversity theory class. My final project was on intercultural mentoring, which was the focus of my graduate work, was mentoring. And so it was intercultural mentoring and cultural competence, and doing a literature review on the relationship between the two, which spoke to the interest of the person teaching the class, to Matt's point, and then also really related to my interest as a graduate student to the other Matt's point. So it really had a harmonious topic for me and for the class.
I'm always amazed at how easy it is to make those connections. I mean, even as you're talking, I could say, you know, cultural humility is something that I just had a student really interested in, and your interest in that piece of competence. And
yeah,
you can make those connections. You just have to be more intentional and purposeful about what is this professor interested in? What am I interested in? And how does this assignment help us make that next step to a paper, a round table, those pieces? I don't think it's as hard as we sometimes feel like it is. We just need to do that little extra work of getting to know each other and getting to know interests and how they align.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would also just add that assuming you've done your literature review as part of your dissertation or thesis or assignment or whatever, and you now decide you want to publish a theory manuscript with the Journal of Leadership Education, one of the things you will realize is that maybe your literature review is lacking organization.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, by that I mean your literature review may be lacking headings that are typically, required in a lot of these journals and conference proposals, such as abstract, justification for why you're doing the literature review, like background information and methodology. Because usually, I've done it in the past, just review the literature, without really thinking about the inclusion criteria and things like that. So those are the areas where you might need to put in some work to make it acceptable. And of course, with the help of your advisor or your professor,
Mm-hmm.
as you go into that journal, remember, you have to take the initiative. I'm not going to, as a professor, I'm not going to be the one going to say the Journal of Leadership Education and trying to tell my students, okay, these are the guidelines. No, I'll just point you in the right direction. I expect you to go there and see the guidelines for the particular type of submission. In this case, if it's a literature review, I would think the best fit would be a theory manuscript. So you would go to the Journal of Leadership Education, see the requirement for a theory manuscript, and as well as exploring articles, like recent articles that's been published in that category.
Mm-hmm.
Tell you the things you need to focus on and how to format it.
And Dami, that really transitions us well into our next topic, which is in thinking through common pitfalls that happen when trying to transition academic assignments into additional outputs.
I was just thinking, as all of us were talking, we're making this sound like really easy. And if you're just like thoughtful, it'll all just happen. And like, I don't know about you, but it feels really messy to me a lot of times in thinking about what work goes where and what can be purposed and all of that. So I also just advise people to, like, if you're a grad student, you're also just going through your own educational journey. And although I think getting experience, bringing your work somewhere else outside of just the classroom space can be really valuable, the classroom space and doing that assignment itself is also really valuable. And so maybe that's where you need to be. Maybe you just need to be doing that assignment to understand where your scholarship is going, or to just unpack the learning from that thing. But I think what we're pointing out is there are these opportunities to then think about if that work is right, or you want to use some other space to do something with that work, or to share it with others. There are these opportunities, but it's okay if it feels messy and that you don't have capacity to do that at the moment. And you may also be able to revisit it later. You know, you can come back to it. Try not to wait too long because life happens. But I guess that, like, it's okay to be thinking about this, but try not to be doing that with every single assignment and just submitting everywhere, because then you're not going to have focus and you might get really overwhelmed in that process.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I've already mentioned two pitfalls as part of the things I've said. One is the length. You would realize that for the most part, your assignments are verbose and you have to cut out the fluff. I thought I've said that. I've also mentioned the lack of organization. Sometimes you have all that you need. It's just that you need to organize it better to fit the specific journal. And I guess the last piece would be to realize that not all assignments are suitable to be published as a journal. Maybe you have to consider other outlets like blogs, like poster presentation at conferences, and there are different other outlets like roundtable discussion. We've mentioned all these things. So I think there's a common pitfall is the realization that your assignment may be lacking the rigor that's required by these outlets.
I think too, you speak to a good point, both Lori and Dami, around cultivating mentors, both as faculty members, additional faculty members in your program, ALE members, reaching out to, us who are on this call or others to say, hey, I've been working on this thing. Might there be somewhere I could take this that I'm not thinking of? Because sometimes I know for me as a graduate student, I really thought linearly about assignments. And part of this work is expanding to looking at what a variety of outputs could be, the training sessions, extension, a workshop, a roundtable. So just really starting to expand our thinking on what we mean when we say scholarly outputs too. Or even there's journals that are specifically for graduate students too.
Lori, I really like what you said. I think that's really important, is to be able to figure out what assignments can you do this with, and which assignments you just have to get done so you can get out to the pep rally or the homecoming game on time and that sort of stuff. So being able to do that is really important. I think the number one pitfall I often see with students is some of this imposter syndrome that I think as a field we deal with. We worry about, is my stuff good enough? Does it contribute? Is my professor going to want me to do this and push this forward? Do they already know too much? And, that kind of imposter syndrome, and thinking of, I'm worried about approaching someone with my work. And I will tell you, it's been my experience over the last 2 decades that anytime someone approaches someone I know as a faculty member, myself included, we're just so excited to talk about the topic, so excited to talk about leadership education, that it will always go somewhere. It'll always go with, well, maybe you look into this, or maybe it needs more of this, or maybe this is a really great idea, let's run with it. But I would encourage you to talk to your faculty members, advisors, and certainly would like to go off of what Hannah said. And there's many people outside of even your university that are doing some really wonderful work who would just love to have a conversation. So those are always the ways that I have started to move things towards presentation, a roundtable, certainly publishing a paper. It's always been me talking to someone about something I was interested in and seeing if there's some interest in that side too. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's not, and sometimes there is, and that's okay. Both of those are okay in that process, because then you get to know and build more connections, and then who can you write with and how do you want to engage in that process. So I think Matthew Gold on here is a really good example. He just carried me across the finish line with something we published, and like, I'm not sure I had the bandwidth to do it, but he wasn't letting me slow down, and he was saying, we'll get it done. Have you gotten to it? That's okay. He gave me lots of grace, and allowed me a wonderful opportunity to contribute on the work that he had put together, and just published it. And it got there because of his grace and because him asking and because of his interest in moving it forward. And it's a really good piece that's going to benefit people. So I think from a student perspective, faculty really, really appreciate that. We really, really do. So.
Yeah, and I think that's another piece of, like, a lot of times in your classes, they're asking you to submit assignments individually because they want to see your own writing or competency. Sometimes classes can be collaborative, but I find a lot of my scholarly work is collaborative. And I'm just now seeing this question in the Q&A around, like, how do you find co-authors if it's not your faculty member? And a lot of times I've taken things that I've been interested in to roundtables. And even if there's only a few people that show up, usually it's people who are actually really interested in your topic. And I've ended up collaborating with people I've met there. Or even like poster sessions are places you can do that and network, to talk to multiple people around your topic, or just showing up and going to things like the fan groups and talking about your own interests. Or at ILA, there's member communities. And so there's opportunities for grad students, specifically in the leadership field, I think, to come and have a space to share your work and then listen for people who are wanting to collaborate or who have common interest in that topic.
And I think to what you were saying, Matt and Lori, is to reach out as a grad student, and someone gave a presentation at ALE that really resonated with you or the work you want to do, to reach out and ask for an opportunity to connect. I know that happened with a graduate student at the University of Florida, former graduate student, Jonathan Orsini, in that he was working on mentoring stuff. I had worked on mentoring stuff. So we set up just like a research Zoom meeting to talk about it. And it ended up being one of the most productive research collaborations of my career thus far. And we've been research partners for 3 years. And that all started with an email too. So really reaching out and seeing, I know sometimes it can be helpful to even look at previous years from ALE, the just conference proceedings. So look at the titles, just search for it. Who's doing the work that you're interested in? If it's pedagogy or mentoring or international work, that can help to identify people that might be good to connect with too.
Yeah, I'd also like to add that sometimes you don't have to, it's not deep in terms of, looking for potential collaborators. It's not, you don't have to have a well thought out research idea. No, you don't. If you do, that's great, but you don't. Sometimes all you have to have is an idea, just a research interest. I encourage students to come and say, hey, I see you're interested in this. For example, I'm interested in teamwork. I see that you're interested in teamwork. I'm also interested in teamwork, and I'll be open to collaborating with you in the future if you have any ideas. There are times where, as faculty members, we are maybe overextended and we have certain projects that are just lying dormant in the computer, and we just need a little help. Maybe just someone to, do a little bit more literature review on that topic. I maybe already have the data, I've already done the analysis, I just need a little bit more literature review. So if a student were to, come up to me and say, hey, I'm interested in teamwork, then I can say, well, I actually have a paper that I haven't really given much time to. Would you be willing to do this? It might just be reviewing the literature, and then the person becomes a co-author. So,
with our final few minutes before we open it up to questions, let's end by thinking about tools or resources that can assist authors in facilitating this transformation experience, and then potential opportunities for funding or grants.
So I'll give credit to Dave Rush. Him and Kathy Guthrie and I just wrote a book, Introduction to Research on Leadership, and he wrote towards the end, there's like a section, like a couple pages on how to move your student work into publication. There's a few things on there. We've covered some of them, but there's also some other helpful hints in there. And so that might be one resource to go to, as well as if you're just interested in research at the graduate level. It was written for that audience in mind, so the rest of the book might be of interest as well.
I don't have any specific resource except that you go to the outlet. If it's a journal, visit the website. That's a good resource. Of course, in addition to what Laurie said, there might be certain textbooks that help you and maybe explain this a little better, but the website is your best bet. It has most of what you need.
To that point, the editors of the journal often are very, very helpful. Edit the symposium for the Journal of Leadership Studies, and we always like talking to folks who have an idea or thinking about a particular line of research that they'd like to get involved with. We take it really serious when someone's interested, and kind of build those connections. And even if we can't publish it with what we're doing, we certainly make recommendations out and also talk about, hey, have you worked with this person, or have you seen this person's work? They'd be great if you got together with them and put something together on this front. So I have found that most folks in leadership studies have been where you've been, have worked through this process, and are willing to help at this point, tell you what they've gone through or what they think would work well.
I'll add that we actually have another ALE webinar this afternoon that's on mini grants. So if any of you are interested in that, I'm going to drop the actual link to the Zoom session. It's at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So if you are interested and available at that time, you can join that Zoom, where you can learn more about some resources that are available for mini grants from ALE.
This is like an ALE afternoon. I was laughing about that. And like, we have had 2 webinars in like months, and both Friday, September 29th. So just get to spend your day with leadership educators. Okay, are we ready to open it up if people have questions, insights, comments from people on the call? Like we said at the beginning, we don't think that we know everything on this. So there's likely things that you've been doing or seen others do that could add to our own practice. So at this point, we can open it up on chat, or if you want to share your pop onto video too, I think that's great. John, you're good with that?
Well, yes, I did have a question that was emailed to me for you all. So the question was, how can AI assist researchers in finding gaps or maybe helping format an article that can fit the journal requirements? And then also, have educators considered the advantages to AI technology?
So I think this is really interesting too. I was just looking at some different journal websites that said specifically, if you use AI at all, you have to indicate it in your submission. I think that is the Journal of Leadership Studies policy. I'm not sure what Jules is right now. So I would say you want to be really cautious in thinking through what the journals are requiring, because if you have to disclose, and so even looking at that, like we said before, you write a class project and use AI, because what your professor says might be different than what the journal says, or the conference or the extension publication. Other thoughts?
I totally agree, man. I was just looking at, I think, JLS too, and I saw that. So yes, you want to be careful with this AI ChatGPT. I'm not saying you can't, but just be transparent about it. But I think they have their place too. I think it's sometimes helpful to, if you say you wanted to write about a topic and you don't know the things that should be in that topic, the important things you should write about. Sometimes you could maybe ask ChatGPT, what would the research paper on emotional intelligence look like? I'm sure you get something, and then whatever you get, you can use that as a springboard to searching for the authors, because ChatGPT wouldn't give you the names of the authors. It's not going to decide it. So you can, but you can use that to search for the authors, and then I think that would be good, as long as you're not copying the exact phrasing from ChatGPT. I think you can be useful to know what to.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just to that point of AI and ChatGPT. I'll tell you, your faculty, especially in those topics, they know what's should be cited. They know what should be kind of accounted for. And Chat GPT just does not know that at that level. And if you really want to be a good scholar, and if this is something you're interested in, understanding those themes and who the folks are who are talking about your specific topic and engaging is really something you're going to have to go through and engage with that, because I have found that Chat GPT isn't as difficult, just because oftentimes, especially in leadership scholarship, when a student will publish something, I can tell immediately that Stephen Covey isn't the best to cite when talking about something very specific about emotional intelligence or something. It's something to that level. You recognize the names, you know who the folks are in your particular line. So if you're only talking about what ChatGPT does, you're probably going to end up in some trouble with that, because it's just not that scholarly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with what Dami had said. It's, I think, more helpful to get an outline of what can be included, but not really something that you should be, at least for now, using to start pushing along any of the actual writing. I know in some of my class assignments that have not been published, it just helps me start generating ideas, especially if I get stuck. But really, from that idea generation, nothing else is used for it, just because I know that it's not going to help me with authors. It's not going to help me with any additional writing aspects.
This would be an awkward place for you to tell me, Matt, that the entire article we published was from ChatGPT. So if that's coming, please say that to later.
Nope, you're good.
Oh, I always have a question. Thank you, Carol. Any additional advice for creating a 3-credit-hour independent study for a graduate student interested in research that leads to a journal publication? It's a great question.
One of my most powerful experiences as a student was doing a 3-credit-hour independent study where I just assigned myself readings on my main topic that I just hadn't created space to do yet. And instead of pressuring myself to write like a big assignment at the end, I wrote journals like weekly on the readings that I had assigned myself, which ended up basically being like a really long, like annotated bibliography that was so helpful in my dissertation. And so I think sometimes just creating the space for the student to actually go and explore the literature that they really need to know to then do that study. That's a little bit more literature based than it is the study component, but it can help just create space, which is awesome.
One of the more unique ideas that I did as a student was I built curriculum for a summer 3-credit-hour independent study that was needed for the mentoring program I worked for. And it was a 7-year curriculum based on the social change model. So every year was one of the values of the social change model. So my independent study was building the curriculum, writing a workbook, and building PowerPoints that then we would implement over 7 years. So it was really useful to this organization. And then we also wrote up objectives to go along with it so that we could do an evaluation at the end of every year. So then that has become a rotating door of being able to submit that to ALE and then being able to transition it into a practitioner-centered publication where we're publishing the curriculum to share with other people who are in student affairs or literature education. So that's been a really productive independent study that was really structured around the curriculum development component of leadership education. And that is great, the family business needing training. And Carol, the example I shared earlier too, which you're welcome to email me, and I'm happy to share the article too. But the article that I published that I was sharing my screen on was a needs assessment for that mentoring organization that then built a training. So that could be a really easy independent study is, well, maybe not easy, but a smooth structure is to do a needs assessment with the family business and develop the training accordingly and then do the training. Would be have some great output potential. Other ideas? We've got 3 minutes. If anyone has any final questions or things that you all would like to share, we'd love to hear it. All right. I feel like that, what is it they say in class? Like 11 seconds? Oh, contact info for the panel too. Yes, I'll put my email in the chat if people want to reach out, and other panelists are welcome to as well. Yeah, isn't that what they say? Isn't it 11 seconds that you're supposed to wait in the front of the classroom to see if someone responds, and usually someone does by then or something? Yes.
Well, thank you all very much for taking time out of your day to speak on this topic and offer your insights and guidance to both faculty and graduate students out there. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great
Thank you
weekend.
so much. Yeah, have a great weekend.
Everybody, bye-bye.